Awesome. Well, good evening. Welcome. We're excited to welcome Kim Krans uh, to Joseph-Beth, albeit virtually. Kim is a visionary artist, author, and creator of the New York Times bestseller, The Wild Unknown Tarot, a prolific and creative influenced by a range of mystical traditions. Kim has published three oracle decks and guidebooks, one memoir, an interactive journal, notebooks, note card set, and five children's books, which is a prolific amount of work. Kim is also known for her work as a multimedia artist, filmmaker, and musician, and lives in New York City. So, Kim, I don't know how you have enough time to even do these events with everything else you have going on. So, welcome and thank you for joining us from the city so nice they named it twice.
I'm actually in Los Angeles now.
Oh, really? Oh, well,
yeah. The
that's
pandemic moved us all around a little bit, and some of us not, but yeah, it shifted me out to the West Coast.
yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And yeah, I'm excited to hear you talk. Your new Wild Unknown Alchemy deck and guidebook came out just last week on July 5th. And I'm excited to hear you talk about it because you both
Sounds great.
wrote it and did all the illustrations as well, right?
I did. It's been that setup with all the Wild Unknown decks so far that I both made the drawings. In a lot of ways, the drawings come first, and then the guidebooks come as a way to sort of serve people as they use the decks and learn how to interact with them.
That's great. So what we'll do is I'll certainly enjoy listening to the presentation, and then when it's time, if you're joining us on the Zoom platform, you can use just the Q&A function, and if you're joining us on Facebook, put it right in the comments, and then I will moderate all the questions in just a little bit. So without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Great. And is it possible for me to see the chat or I guess I can't see Facebook from here, but.
Yeah, it's if the chat pops up, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, welcome everyone. So gosh, alchemy is such a huge, vast topic, and it was very daunting for me to work with this subject as the last and final piece of the series of the Wild Unknown decks. And just a little background about where I'm coming from with alchemy is that I first approached it kind of in three ways. First, as a visual artist, so very interested in the engravings that come from medieval Europe and some of alchemy across other lands and regions and times, but I focused in on a lot of the engravings that came from 16th and 17th century. And then, so my first background is coming at it as an artist. So really looking at the symbols that were used in consistently and very mysteriously. The alchemists were really amazing at kind of veiling their findings in secrecy and symbols. So, for example, I have a book here called Alchemical Symbols and Secret Alphabets. And it goes through the different planets and the different metals and talks about how many different symbols there are for each one. I think for gold at some point, and this is just tracking Europe. And who knows how many parts of Europe, but that there's 60 some symbols for gold. And then, for mercury and for quicksilver, there's like all these just stacks and stacks of symbols. Some of them contradict each other. Sometimes alchemists were using the same symbol to try to trick the viewer into not knowing the particular experiment that they were working with. So as far as visual art goes, this was like a kind of like a golden, no pun intended, like a gold mine of really rich symbology. and also incredibly intimidating for me to try to approach. So you'll see, especially in the 22 mysteries cards that are in this deck, you'll see a lot of the images that are kind of straight from that era. An example would be like the green lion eating the sun. You'll see that appear a lot in European alchemy, Greek alchemy. And so that's one way in which I was coming to this subject. Another way in which I was coming to it is through depth psychology and this study of and the work of Carl Jung. And I went back to school before I made the archetypes deck and started studying Jung's approach to symbol and image and the power of image that he wrote about a lot. He wrote mostly about it in relation to dream, but he was also very interested in the mandala and just image in general. So I come at it also from that point of view, which is using alchemy as a kind of map of the psyche or a map of the self. So that when we say we're going through, an ending, a difficult ending that's somewhat confusing, you could say that there's mortifactio. So we'll go over that in a minute, but these different operations in alchemy, they help us kind of have a map for our lives so we can start to see our life from an elemental point of view. And it's a really interesting way to see one's life through an alchemist's eye. It kind of depersonalizes it and brings it more into the elemental field. And you realize, these are actually big archetypal movements that people have been going through across time and in all eras. Being in the fire, so to speak, or being in the ash. These are very universal phases of existence. So that's the second way in which I approached alchemy. And you'll see in the writing and feel in the guidebook that that's very threaded throughout, using alchemy as a map of the psyche. There's an amazing book called Anatomy of the Psyche by Edinger that tracks the 8 alchemical operations, which are the trump cards of this particular deck that I created. They're kind of the powerhouses. They give the big map of the psyche and what one or what personally or collectively we're going through. So that's a really great resource if you're interested in delving in more to the depth psychology point of view of alchemy. And then the third and final way in which I approached it is as a true practitioner of, you could say, using the body, studying the body and the prana and the breath work and meditation as a form of alchemy in and of itself. So really thinking about the relationship between the vessel in alchemy and the vessel of the physical body and the physical relationships, the home, the climate of the community and the ecosystem of the globe and the country. You can think of any of these as an alchemical vessel, kind of these conceptual containers that we put around things, and the body's the kind of the basic first and foremost of those containers. So I have done my best as a kind of like tried and true practitioner of putting some of the alchemical suggestions or realizations that the alchemists had. I've tried to test my own theories, whether it be through breath work or different practices that come from the Eastern spiritual traditions and lineages. And if you look at really any spiritual lineage, you'll often find at the very center of it, somewhere back in all of the teachings or the scriptures, is often described a flame, the first flame, or this sort of light, this separation of darkness to light. So those opposites, the dark light, the sun and moon, the base and the noble, the lead to gold, the unconscious to conscious, you'll see these pairings of opposites. It's a really huge, huge theme in alchemy. And the alchemists were very interested in understanding how to work with those pairs of opposites, which you could say is also what we're trying to learn how to do now, is work with the tension that arises from the polarity in our world, in our own selves, in our culture, in our society. So I think they were a little bit ahead of the time in knowing that it was really all about polarity and what can be born from the tension of the polarities if you have an experimental approach to it, if you can hold the experiment and just observe, and what is the result? What is the unknown result we haven't yet seen? So that's kind of some background about how I came to this subject, and then tried to, as best that I could, after being at Pacifica Graduate Institute and studying Jung's approach to alchemy and learning more and more about it. And it was about 2 years of me kind of finding my way through the material in that program. And then after I got out of the program and started to see how helpful the content was for my life personally, I knew that the alchemy deck would be the fourth and final of the Wild Unknown series, and that people, even if overwhelmed by the concepts in alchemy and the symbols in alchemy, myself included, amidst that complexity, there's such great teachings and such a beautiful model that we can help to understand our life in a more sort of fundamental, elemental, experimental, experiential way. And so I felt it was my karmic duty to try to tackle the subject of alchemy. So I appreciate all the support of the deck, and for Chronicle Books for putting out the project. The cards are hex-shaped, which is unique to this deck and unlike any of the other decks that I've done. The first two, the Wild Unknown Tarot and the Wild Unknown Animal Spirit, are a very typical rectangular form. And then the Wild Unknown Archetypes deck, as I was getting interested in Jung and the mandala and the impact of the circle, the image of the circle as a map for the psyche, as it's suggested it might be through some Jungian psychology. All those cards are circular. And what's kind of cool about that, just visually, some of you who are actually just hands-on using the cards, is that it literally pivots us out of our typical mindset of up and down and left to right, this sort of like logistical thinking that the typical cards have, where you just put one, you know, if it's upright or it's upside down, and there's this sort of more stable yet rigid mindset around it. So the circle kind of undoes that, where the cards can appear tilted and completely upside down, but also there's a more nuanced way that they can appear. And then the alchemy deck, I'll just show a couple of the cards. They're all hex. So unlike any of the other decks, they're interrelated and interlocking. So, you know, the iron card can then touch and relate to the smoke card in a reading. So if you're using the cards, there's like this sort of secondary subplot, so to speak, that you could get into around which cards are connecting with each other and which cards are further apart. So it's interesting to kind of get into a different mindset around the shape of the cards and how we typically approach cards. It's more alchemical in and of itself, thinking of, it's the shape is based off of the beehive and the cellular structure of the hive, in that each hive is modular and supports this greater shape. There's no kind of ruler in terms of the beehive's architecture. They all are kind of this perfect collaborative sacred, an example of sacred geometry. So even if the cards are really new for you to handle and maybe a little cumbersome to get them back in the box, I think it's really great to encourage longtime readers or people who are new to the deck to really think about the shape and how it shifts the mind's perception of the cards and the mind's perception or ability to kind of say, I know exactly what this card means. I think the hex shape always keeps us in a rigid mental space. So that's a little bit about the shape and logistics of the deck in general. And I wanted to go through for a moment here these 8 alchemical operations, just as a map of kind of what the trump cards or the sort of big overarching themes of the deck are. And you could compare these 8 cards to, in the tarot, the major arcana. So they're kind of the big whammies, and they represent these big archetypal moments in one's life, or maybe years and decades in one's life, that we likely can't avoid because they're kind of inherent to the human condition. So I'll go through that now. Let's see if I can share my screen.
Is it working? It should be right at the bottom there.
Yeah. It's not letting me, like, here we go. Okay.
There we go. Yep.
Can you see this? You can see that, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, great. So these are the 8 alchemical operations. This is the illustration from the guidebook. I'll just go through them briefly, and then we'll look at the card artwork. So at the very top at 12 o'clock, you'll see the fire element and calcification. Calcinatio is the Latin for it. And this, people talk about if something becomes calcified, it gets hardened. So that's like an excess of this operation, but we all need a sort of fire to begin something. So calcification is when the fire begins and the process of something is activated. So anytime if you're doing, I always think of like the phrase a startup kind of sounds like what it is. It has this ignition to it. So, and then the startups, they come and they go because there is that fire, but it's all about does the thing have a duration, and is it well tended to? Does it have enough wood and oxygen? Is it being fed properly and not too hot? And we can start thinking about these different aspects of our life, like one would tend to the fire. Solutio is the next one. It's a water-based, so each of these first 4 at least are elementally oriented. Solutio is when there's an excess of water, or the dominant element is water, and typically there's a kind of groundlessness that comes with this because things are being washed away. It's like can sometimes be emotional, or like the fluids are flowing and there's a kind of being washed out. They talk about it. There's a card in the deck called the Drowned King. And the king in alchemy is often spoken about as the ego, and that the king needs to be drowned. That's one of the requirements of the work, is the drowning of the king. And that's, of course, applicable in any gender or form, or even it's conceptual more than anything, is that the ego has to dissolve in order for there to be room for more consciousness or benevolence to enter the operation or the process or the experiment. So solutio is a real washing out. And they say in alchemy, dissolve to coagulate is a common saying, alchemical saying, that you have to lose oneself to kind of reassemble and become oneself. So that moves us to coagulatio, which is the next one. Coagulation is the earth element. It's a bringing together. If someone uses the phrase like things are really taking shape, that's a way that coagulation is expressed. It's not necessarily the highest form of coming together. There can be a kind of density to it, but we can talk about that in a minute. Sublimation, you'll see it's like it's the air. So there's a kind of up and out vaporizing, moving towards the ether. It can be kind of an expressive gesture. Mortifactio is, as I was speaking to before, it has this kind of like the compost pile. It's the death phase. It's the regeneration. It's the ending of the garden and, deep fall into winter, where things are dropping down and saturating the earth. And it's the mysterious phase. We don't really know what the result will be. The identity of the particular things has been lost individually, and now there's a kind of churning of the earthen element. Rotatio is, as you might imagine, it's rotation, the again and again of the learning or the teaching or the day-to-day. On one hand, it can be like Groundhog Day, when you're kind of like hitting your head against the same wall, and there's a lack of kind of vitality or meaning in the day-to-day or the repetitive nature. On the other hand, it can be an incredibly profound transformative process to do the same thing every day, to track the same, whether it be your meditation or your breath work or your walk or your tending with your family. There's this day-to-day of all of our lives, and if we can bring more consciousness to the day-to-day, it's incredibly powerful. So rotatio is like my very favorite right now, at least. Separatio is when there is coagulation, when there is togetherness, and the two things need to separate in order for there to be a higher consciousness that's known in the two individual parts. So you could think of like a very codependent relationship where you're just like, I needed to get out of there so I could breathe again and remember that I'm me. Or maybe you don't need to get out of there, but just taking a weekend away where people just call you, you instead of Jen and so, instead of always the coupleness. So separatio is this really powerful, very, it can be painful or it can be very conscious and clean, a way that the identity, our individual natures can be explored and kind of come to fruition. Conjunctio is the final card. It's sort of like the world card in the tarot. It's when the two things that are separated, these pairs of opposites, come together with a certain level of consciousness, and there is a birth of a third thing. There's sort of this unexpected new form that's like essentially never been seen or known by either entity or potentially the world, that is expressed and as a result of this joining of the opposites, or union of the opposites. And it's really beautiful promise of alchemy that if we are able to work with those opposites in a way where we have patience and a kind of dutiful observation, and also graciousness around the process, that something will emerge that's unknown. One of my favorite alchemical sayings is, more will be revealed. One door opens the next is another one. So if we want to just look through the card art here, this is the calcification card. And you could just think about, as you're looking through as I'm scrolling through them, this one being the fire card, that heat that begins something, but that heat that can also lead to anger, resentment, a kind of rigidness, a calcifying of the mind around things having to be a certain way. You could think of, as I'm scrolling through here, what phase of your life you're in, or what's the dominant element in my life right now. This is the Solutio card, that drowning into water. And in many cases, it was depicted as a bird flying downward. Coagulation, this is the coming together of the earth element. But as you can see here in this drawing, I was trying to kind of hint towards there being a certain amount of gooiness, a little bit of stickiness in there, that the self can't quite be known, because it's just not at that phase quite yet. It's at this formulation phase. Things are forming. Any new relationship has to go through this phase. It's just a matter of, what happens then, or what happens when you sense a kind of stickiness in a relationship. I think of this card as like couples and Netflix a little bit on the couch. There's just like a certain stickiness that can happen. The Netflix is like designed in that way. There was actually someone at a talk the other day that where I was going through these cards, and he came up to me afterwards. He was like, I work for Netflix, and we actually use the word sticky. He said, when we're tracking shows and their success, we say, how sticky is it? And it has to be a certain level of stickiness for them to do another season. So you'll see, like, alchemy can be taken so seriously, and be very intimidating, but you also see it everywhere. You'll see these basic concepts used everywhere. And if we can become kind of skillful about these terms and these operations and the elements, we can start to like really experiment with our life. And then, so you're watching the show and you're like, I feel sticky. I'm stuck to the couch. I've coagulated to the couch. Like I need some fire to like get up and out the door. So it's really helpful in these little instances. And then you can take it less personally. You're like, Netflix makes relation, So it's alchemy is not something that happened in the past. It's happening now everywhere, and we're partaking in it all the time. If you have a preference around hot or iced coffee, you're working with alchemy to a greater or lesser degree. Can you still hear me? I just got a message that my internet is unstable.
Yeah, it kind of stuttered for just 1 second, but it was
okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
So this is sublimation. This is the air moving towards ether, that's going up and out. It does have this sort of celebratory, like a fireworks feeling, which is probably not totally, it's not really this card because that involves a lot of fire, but still it has this sort of dispersing feeling to it. And we experience this operation, on occasion in our life for sure. It's not as much of a sustained one, in my understanding of it, because the up and out nature disperses. So it's not like you can sustain fireworks, for example. It's like an event. It's an evening. It's not like, it doesn't just keep going and going and going. Here's mortification. This is the compost pile churning of the earthen. But the eye there in the center, it's kind of like seeing something that we can't yet see that's going to be formed, but isn't there yet. Rotatio, this is that concept of doing something again and again. And the spider is a really beautiful example in nature of that, where the spider is weaving this like very precise, very like, mystical, beautiful shape. And if it gets torn down by the wind, the work is to weave again. It's not like going and filing a complaint somewhere or like trying to get a new job. It just simply is weaving. So it's very beautiful when you can start to observe these operations in nature, see how nature is already doing it, and at what aspect of your life is in rotation. I mean, we're all in rotation in that we live, day to day, and we're rotating around the sun. There's so many rotations that are happening. But you can think about a particular thing that you're rotating, that you're doing daily, that is, it's your work to do in the world. And doing it with a sort of spider's approach. This is the separatio element or operation that I spoke to earlier. Breaking the ties that are unconscious, or that it's just time for them to be released. I actually had to present on this card in grad school. We all got like assigned different operations, and each person had to present a mini lecture on them. So this was kind of this concept was my first deep delve into the alchemy deck. And once I started looking at the artwork and the ways in which separation happened, I was also in my personal life, like at the early phases of going through a divorce, and a relationship that was over a decade long. And so I just happened to be assigned this operation, but it helped me so much to see what I was going through on a vaster scale, on a kind of universal scale, and know that there's some sort of consciousness that wants to be known. And that's perhaps what was, or part of what was leading, us into these independent directions. So instead of being as deep in the drama, or it's deep in the story of what's wrong with me and what's wrong with them, and what, I could think about it in this other way. Not to say there wasn't still a lot of turmoil and difficulty in it, but I could see it as, oh, this is a timeless and necessary phase in the growth of beings. Not to say everyone has to handle it the same way, but divorce is an example of this separatio dynamic at play. There's other examples of it. Another one is the cutting of the umbilical cord. It's our first experience of that, and separatio is often depicted with a sword. The Ace of Swords is a separatio in the tarot. So that cutting is, anytime there's cutting, if you see, like, in I'm trying to think of like a movie or something that has this. A lot of movies do use this. The protagonist is separated from something and they have to find it again. There's and the whole search to find it again is what brings them sort of to a deeper place. So once I felt that the helpful nature of learning about alchemy, I was like, I need to create this deck and get these concepts out into the world in kind of a user-friendly way. And this is the final operation, conjunctio. You can see the pairs of opposites there, and the dark and the light, and the infinity serpent-like form that's encircling them. And the idea is that the pairs of opposites, they don't produce gray in this case. It's not like a compromise or middle ground that the polarization creates. The polarization through the effort of the alchemists kind of holding the experiment is that it produces this unknown color, this unseen, unanticipated solution to the polarity, to the tension and discomfort of the polarity. So that's the promise of conjunctio, and in a lot of ways, the promise of alchemy. I'm going to stop the screen share there. And I think we could go to questions if you have any.
Absolutely. The first one I had actually was, and you mentioned this early in your presentation, is that often for you the art would come first.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess just sort of over the course of your career with like, a graphic memoir and,
Mm-hmm.
These wild unknown decks, that the art is so forward.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, is that sort of where for you the storytelling for all of these really has its beginning, but that's the through line more than certainly like the writing?
It's such a great question. Thanks for asking it. It means a lot to me because I've always been on the fence between writing and drawing. And I went to art school, a boarding art school in high school, and double majored, which they didn't want me to do. But I was there for 3 years in my high school. And I write about this in the guidebook, and the teacher that I worked with there is who I dedicated the alchemy deck to. But after 1 year in the visual arts program, I knew I needed to double major in the creative writing department as well. And they were like, you can't do that. Your scholarship is for visual arts and you need to be more dedicated to that. I was like, I have to do this. I know I have to do this. So I took some like extra credits and finagled my schedule so that I could study both the writing and the art. And I remember my teacher saying to me, you're going to have to decide. And I was like, do I have to decide? And some part of me is still saying, do I have to decide? And she said, well, okay, fine, be your stubborn self, but go to school for art. And she said, the writing will always be there. The writing will follow. Go to college to study the image. So I was thinking of going to Sarah Lawrence for writing. And then I got into Cooper Union, which thankfully was a full scholarship school in New York. And she said, you have to go study visual art. The words will follow you. So I just delved into the visual art world and never really expected to make tarot decks or anything of the sort. But when I created the first tarot deck and I self-published it, and it started to, this was in 2012, kind of before there were the plethora of decks, indie decks that we see now, it came out and it just sold really quickly, and it felt like it kind of out of control, and people were writing all kinds of things about the card's meaning. They were writing all kinds of things, and I was like, this, I got to get this under control here. If I'm going to create this deck, I have to give them a little bit of a guide, steering the wheel a little about what these cards indicate. So the first original Wild Unknown Tarot guidebook, it came out like a month later. I had it like quick printed domestically, 500 copies or something. And then we printed 500 more and then more. And I wrote it so quickly that I feel very self-conscious about it as an author looking back, because I simply had to it was a necessity. And then you'll see, if you look at that guidebook compared to all the ones after it, they are much more dense and they get deeper and deeper, because I was essentially ready to approach the material as both a visual artist and a writer. I didn't know I would have to do that with the tarot deck. I was completely like flabbergasted by the trajectory of that deck, and its needs as a self-published work. So I don't know if this even answers your question, but for me, the art is always leading, but it's sneaky. The words are kind of side by side. And especially with this last deck, I was kind of writing and drawing at the same time, whereas the other works were very much image first.
It's interesting. Yeah, because especially like, it seems like the art is also can often be a way to process things when words can't do it.
Exactly. I think it's such a good point. And in a lot of ways, I wish I could just put out the images. But I don't quite think either I'm ready for that or the receivers or the audience is ready for that. It's almost like we need this pairing to kind of work with some of the images and know where to go with them. At least a first step of where to go. I really try not to be dogmatic or closed-minded in terms of what the cards mean.
Yeah. A question from Facebook about the newest deck was where did you begin the suits? Why are the suits constructed the way they are?
Oh, it's a really great question. So we talked about the 8 operations, and they were the first kind of founding fathers of the deck. They were the foundation of the deck. And then I knew that the planets would have to be involved, obviously, for as alchemy is a study of, in some ways you could say, lead to gold, but that lead is tied to Saturn and gold to the sun. So every one of the metals has their planetary counterpart. And you'll read about that in the guidebook. They're very much tied to each other. They even look like each other. The iron card and the Mars card, you'll see the correspondence. They kind of look like pairs, or a in the art world is like a diptych. It's like, it means the pairing goes together. So there's let's see here, I'm kind of like jumping around with my response, but there's the planets and then also the sun and moon, and then the associated metals are part of the materials suit. And the materials includes first and foremost the metals, and then these other materials, actually just these dense or earthly materials that are in alchemy, very common in alchemy. So you'll see vinegar and salt and ash and fog and smoke. These qualities that the alchemists often spoke to being present in the laboratory, or that they were actually using as part of the experiment. Oil of vitriol, like things like this. So, and they might seem kind of random, like what would we do with the vinegar card or the ash card? But once you actually start thinking about these materials in our lives and what an impact they have, what an impact salt has in our life, and obviously our food, but also in our body and in our entire balance of our whole system. I mean, if you take vinegar out of like any eating experience, you'll notice it. It's wild how these seemingly simple materials are so present in our lives, and yet we don't notice them. And there's always a kind of a way to think about them in terms of the psyche. So the guidebook will kind of hint you towards how to think about cards that seem kind of, what would I do with the ash card, So those are a couple of the suits. Another group is the 4 seasons and the 4 colors, both of which the alchemists were very, very interested in, again, as depictions of like what phase of the process the experiment is in. What's that?
Oh, you're back. It went silent for a second. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
So you said it was just we kind of dipped out when you were talking about the 4 seasons and the 4 colors.
4 seasons and 4 colors. So the alchemists were very interested in color, and also in what season the experiment was in. I mean, they're just so interested in the natural world. It's like the inspiration and the kind of grand teacher of all things. So knowing that a relationship, a project, writing a book, anything has these sort of 4 seasons in it, and it's a helpful way to sort of map out the process. So the remaining suit is the 22 mysteries, which is just what it sounds like. It's these images that appear often in, especially what I was seeing in the medieval alchemical engravings, that I simply can't, and I haven't found someone who can pin down exactly what they indicate. The Azure Vault is a good example of this. It's a very blue card in the deck, and the Azure Vault, it's written about in this book called Alchemical Psychology by James Hillman. It's a kind of liminal place of the imagination. And it's very numinous space, but anytime I would try to really find out what the alchemists meant by the Azure Vault, there's not much to grasp onto. So I try to kind of honor those mysteries and just simply call them mysteries, in that I only got certain steps in my understanding of them, and knowing that I wanted them to sort of live on, and for that image or concept to have a place in the alchemy deck.
Yeah, another question from online was, can you speak a little bit in the operations to the idea of opposites or polar opposites, such as coagulation and separation, and how the relationship of the operations are constructed?
So, I want to understand the question a little bit more. Like, how are the operations constructed?
Yeah, I think it had to do with your circle. You say, so there was, if I'm understanding the question correctly, so there was separation and coagulation, and they sort of seem to be at 2 different, almost like a push-pull, and they're across the circle from each other. So
I see.
How do the idea of the opposites work in that circle?
Right, I see.
Please let me know if I'm misunderstanding your question.
I really appreciate that question because well, it kind of indicates that there's more going on in my diagram than there actually was there are there is interconnectedness and a kind of response nature that the person questioning, the questionnaire, is picking up on, which is really interesting. It's a kind of next level of thinking about the operations, that when something is coagulated, it naturally is headed towards separation at some point because of its own kind of directionality, or its own what must come to pass. So I think this person is picking up on, I don't think it necessarily relates in the drawing like this. I wish that it did. I actually hadn't even thought about that potential of the opposites. But in this book, Anatomy of the Psyche, just in terms of this maps the question, it's really interesting because each chapter is dedicated to one operation. And at the beginning of the chapter, there's these sort of mind maps of coagulation you'll see in the center. And then you'll see all these other concepts kind of put around it that help kind of associate what might be linked to that. So I'll just read some of these. They're kind of, they can be a little wild, but I'll just read them anyway. So coagulatio, the body, the house, the clothes, Saturn, lead, earth, wax, matter, clay, tomb, death, meat, flesh, desire, sulfur, sweetness, honey, relationship. It goes on and on, but you can see it's kind of free associating what things are coagulating. And then each of these different threads kind of leads to a different end point. And some of those end points are conjunctio. It's another operation. In another case, it's mortifactio, the trajectory of body, incarnation, death, tomb, that leads to mortification. So each of them definitely are interrelated. It just depends on like where you go with that operation. I mean, you can use these operations as like creative inspiration to think about, I'm going to make a drawing that's based on, coagulation, where everything's sort of centralized and layered and stuck. Or if you make a drawing that's whatever it is, kind of sensing that you can start to play with these concepts. I mean, the person who asked the question is already sort of playing with it in a more complex level. So it's really cool.
Yeah, that's spectacular. So we just have a couple minutes left. So I guess my last question is, so this is you mentioned a diptych, but this is the end of your triptych, your three,
four.
Four. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Four. So what is next? What's your next, point of inspiration that you are wanting to explore?
I've been working on a record, which is exciting. I used to play in a band and tour before I created the Wild Unknown Tarot deck. And then the tarot deck came out and it kind of took over the trajectory, honestly. And I put a lot of things to the side that were, I wasn't able to sort of sustain while I was tending to this project that now turns out to be a decade-long project of making these decks and guidebooks. So in completing the series and allowing Alchemy to be like the fourth and final, it's giving me a lot of creative freedom. So putting the band back together again. Not the same band, but it's me as a solo artist this time. But I just completed the record, and now we're making music videos.
Okay.
And I know there's a new book coming, and different format, but there's something brewing.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kim. Really appreciate your time this evening or afternoon in Los Angeles. The Wild Unknown Alchemy Deck and Guidebook, which is a beautiful package, is available at both Joseph-Beth's. You can absolutely pick it up in store or order it at josephbeth.com. Or if you happen to be in, say, Los Angeles or somewhere far afield, feel free to support your local independent bookstore because I'm sure they would love to hear from you. So, Kim Krans, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. It's been great to be here.
And we look forward to the album,
Thank you.
videos. I don't know where music videos live anymore.
I know. No idea.
And the next book as well.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, have a wonderful evening.
Bye.